Who doesn't love giant robots? What's even better than giant robots are giant alien robots that transform into cars, trucks, airplanes, tanks, and anything else you can think of, even dinosaurs. This is a series that is personally very important to me, as it was one of the first movies that I ever saw with my dad, something that has continued as a tradition even into the modern day of my brother, my dad, and I going to see movies together. Much like Godzilla, this series is eternal. It is timeless, and many incarnations still broadly hold up even to this day. Be it Transformers Animated, which was made for, yes, quite young younglings, to Transformers Prime, which I will say is one of the best incarnations of the series, and even the Michael Bay movies, despite their somewhat nonsensical writing at times and absolutely glorious CGI battle scenes, for being CGI from 2007, this looks far better than a lot of things we see even today. It still holds up. And with Transformers 1 coming out next month, I think it's a great time for us to be talking about this series. Before, they've always found a great way of mixing the light-hearted stuff for younglings with a much more dark and mature storytelling, even in light-hearted series like Transformers Animated. It's something I've only seen in a few series, things like Avatar: The Last Airbender and a couple of shows on Cartoon Network like Teen Titans and Ben 10 Alien Force / Ultimate Alien. And having recently rewatched both Transformers Prime and Transformers Animated, with the Michael Bay films on the chopping block to go over next, yeah, there's still a great ride to watch through. We're going to be getting into reviews of each of the Michael Bay movies in the future, but much like with Godzilla, if you're going to come to the movies and say, well, it was just a bunch of CGI fights, is there anything wrong with that? I mean, that's the fun. Yes, the human side of the stories is rather important, as much like Godzilla and many of the monsters in his series, the Transformers are simply a reflection of us as well. Though, unlike with Godzilla, you can actually have a movie or even TV show of entirely just the Transformers, since they're able to converse and emote in ways that, well, Godzilla and King Kong just kinda can't. As we've seen from things like the Transformers Fall of Cybertron game and the War for Cybertron trilogy, the biggest criticism of the second one was really just the poor quality of voice acting. And that gets on to some of my concerns of Transformers 1, that it seems they're going for a much more youngling appealing approach, and they have somewhat forgotten the balance of storytelling for the youngling appeal and the more mature storytelling that appeals to older teenagers and even adults who have known the series for a long time. Don't forget to subscribe for more. Yes, the majority of our content is Godzilla, at least at the present. However, Transformers and many other movies were always a part of the plan to move forward. So before we get on to everything, who's your favorite bot? Who's your favorite con? Which is your favorite series of the various continuities? Did you start with the Bayformers or Transformers Animated? What about Beast Wars or the classic G1? I know it might sound a little bit normie of me, but my favorite Transformer is Grimlock. I once went as Halloween dressed as Grimlock in Dinobot mode. Sadly, the costume itself is in disrepair other than the head. My introduction was actually Transformers Cybertron. As heretical as it may sound, all I really remember is the Cyber Planet keys. Even today, I still love the opening, even if I can't remember a single dang thing about the whole series, other than that sweet transformation sequence of Vector Prime. And the various continuities, Optimus Prime has carved himself out as a personal hero of mine, second only to Godzilla himself. Despite my introduction to the series being Transformers Cybertron, what brought me into being interested in the series as a whole much more was the Michael Bay movies. Though the main source of my love for the series didn't come because of it, it was a sort of jumping off point to get me interested in the various other continuities of Transformers, especially those that came after it, like Animated and Prime. However, for that reason, the Bayformers will always hold a special place in my heart, despite their various flaws. It wasn't the first movie I ever saw in theaters, that actually being Spider-Man 2, which we saw with our mother, and the first movie that my father ever took me to was King Kong in 2005. I still get nightmares from that movie, but in a good way. And even before this, we'd seen movies like Alien and Terminator and Predator on TV with our dad. However, Transformers 2007 was the real thing that solidified this idea of my brother, my dad, and I going to see movies together. Which is a tradition that we have continued on when it comes to these big blockbuster movies or franchises that we've loved for years. Captain America: The Winter Soldier, Avatar, Kong Skull Island, Alien Covenant, Godzilla King of the Monsters in 2019, Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, Godzilla vs. Kong, Spider-Man No Way Home, Avatar: The Way of Water, and Godzilla -1. Most of those later movies we actually only see because he comes here to visit for Christmas, since he does live out of state. And that makes it all the more special, especially since it took me a month and a half to see Godzilla -1, and seeing that movie in theaters, in Japanese, with my dad, really made that more special, and all that origin can be traced back to Transformers. And Michael Bay. So, yeah, even if those movies are a bit nonsensical, the joy they can inspire in people, the way it can bring people together, is truly something special. For although Godzilla may be the heart and soul of this channel, you could very much say Transformers is the body. I think we can all certainly agree that Transformers 3 is a bit dumb. Dark of the Moon has a lot of nonsense in it, and as much as I do enjoy Leonard Nimoy as Sentinel Prime, yeah, there's a lot of nonsense in that movie. But again, that's the fun part. Age of Extinction is just mindless nonsense and stupidity, and while I will say I'm not the biggest fan of the characterization of Optimus Prime in that movie, something I am actually somewhat glad Peter Cullen also does share, it's hard to admit it's not fun watching Grimlock absolutely rip and tear through things. Just crank up the Doom music and it's a great heckin' time. We just don't talk about The Last Night. We also all enjoyed Bumblebee, and we do have our issues with Rise of the Beast, but you know, it was okay enough. There's really nothing wrong with some good old-fashioned dumb fun. I mean, you're talking to a guy who watches kaiju films for fun. Dumb fun runs through my veins at all hours. Though it was through those first two movies, the original and Revenge of the Fallen, that I found my way to Transformers Animated when I was a much, much younger little Maxis Allosaurus. It really was perfect for the age I was back then, and growing up with it, I grew to love the Transformers much more than I had with just the movies. More content, more experiences with them. And when I heard that there was going to be a new Transformers series, Transformers Prime, I actually went and watched all of the episodes of G1, from the first episode all the way through the ones with Galvatron past the Transformers the movie. At the time, all of those were on YouTube, and I'm not sure if they're still here anymore, but I do very much remember just binge watching all of them. But then we got to Transformers Prime. If the peaking of my interest was because of the first two movies and then Transformers Animated, the love was solidified with this series. Transformers Prime is, I will forever say, I think the best version of Transformers we've gotten so far, because it takes everything that came before in the Transformers series, and it essentially rebuilds that from square one. You go with the more modern version of Optimus Prime's backstory, which is something we only really ever saw in novels and comics, and it adapts that into a screen series. Him as an archivist, as Orion Pax, before becoming Optimus Prime. Megatron as a gladiator turned politician, before going down the path of evil and darkness. Especially I like how it's very ambiguous as to whether Megatron was originally well-intended and the gradual erosion of his morality came from his just jealousy over Prime becoming a Prime. As the only time we ever really hear about this, it's deliberately from Ratchet's perspective. It's a lot like Shin Godzilla in that it didn't invent a character. It reinvented and reintroduced a character that had existed for years to all of us, and makes itself very distinct, while still having that core we all know and love. From its tone, its characterizations, to the 3D style, which to me was something I'd never seen before in a series other than Code Lyoko when they're inside a Lyoko, but just how sophisticated it was. It has a great mix of those classic G1 callbacks in terms of character designs with the modern Bayformers look, striking a great balance of simplicity and complexity. And hearing those sweet, sweet tones of Peter Cullen's voice again is always a wonderful thing. It was a show where the heroes were heroic, the villains were villainous, and the humans actually weren't useless. It also made it even better is that I was at that age where I was able to now start appreciating the more mature storytelling of something like Transformers Prime. I wasn't really able to do that with Avatar: The Last Airbender and Teen Titans because of how much younger I was when those shows came out. Even to a degree, Ben 10 Alien Force. So Transformers Prime does hold a very special place in my heart for that. I've mentioned many times I'm not the biggest fan of watching series episode by episode, week by week when they're ongoing. Transformers Prime was the singular exception to that other than Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, where every single Saturday my brother and I were just hanging on the edge of our seat waiting for it to come out. I think it was on Saturdays actually. Can't remember the exact day. But every day that a new episode was coming out, we were hanging on the edge of our seat, waiting for it to come out. We could not wait. And even to this day, both of us go and independently have rewatched that series multiple times since it's concluded. We never did follow up with the Robots in Disguise series or any of its other subsequent iterations, but the original is just fantastic. And that's a large part of why I'm not too worried about Transformers 1. Yes, it may skew a bit into jokes for younglings that don't really appeal to much of the older audiences. However, every movie, every iteration of Transformers has had its stumbling blocks. I wasn't the biggest fan of a number of parts of Transformers Beast Hunters in Transformers Prime. Transformers Animated does take a little bit of time to get rolling. It's much more of a superhero series where the Autobots are superheroes, and they're just fighting supervillains for the majority of the first season. It takes time for the Decepticons to come in, even though when they do come in, they are a big threat. It does take some time to get the ball rolling. The Michael Bay movies, we've been over them. They are a bit nonsense, they're a bit CGI, but they are awesome, dumb, fun, and yes, there are some issues with the writing of them. That's, though, more to do with a series like Transformers. Doesn't really work well as a movie series because you only have so much time to tell all the character stories, and a TV show really does do a lot better for that. My biggest hope out of Transformers 1 is that even if the movie itself doesn't go over well, it does inspire more Hasbro creatives to take that risk of full Transformers stories. We've seen it before, they work. Transformers War for Cybertron trilogy. Again, the biggest issue with that really was just the voice acting wasn't up to par. And because Transformers 1 actually does take place at the beginning of Orion Pax and D16's story, you can have them be very different from the characters we know and love. This is the start of their journey. In fact, the whole idea of why Chris Hemsworth is Orion Pax is he will eventually, over the course of the trilogy, become the Peter Cullen Optimus Prime we know and love. I'd love to see that journey, because no one really ever starts the way they are when they end off. Though, yes, in Transformers Prime it is mentioned by Ratchet that Optimus Prime was always a lot more similar to Jack. It is also mentioned that he did change after becoming a Prime. And just seeing what made him change, I think would be a very interesting story to explain. And again, hopefully we will get more things like Transformers in the future, things like the opening of Bumblebee. Maybe not the exact opening shot for shot of the opening of Bumblebee, but something more in that vein of a Transformers story set entirely on Cybertron. I'd love to see a story about a gladiator turned politician who ends up having a falling out with his apprentice who is a former librarian. I'd love to see a story about gladiator robots that are torn apart and experimented on by a mad scientist with a cyclops eye and turned into robot dinosaurs. Even if the movie itself doesn't do well, I hope it does well enough to show, yeah, it can hold its own. That people would go come see series like this, or at least stories like this with no humans in it. In a bit of the same way that Godzilla Minus One showed, people will come to a Godzilla movie for good human characters, and they won't just come for giant CGI monster fights. That was a movie that was entirely Godzilla versus humans, and it still works. We're going to be going into more detail on all of the stories on their own individually, every individual series, at some point in the future for Transformers. So if you are interested in that, subscribe for more, comment your thoughts below, let us know what your favorite part of Transformers is, your favorite bot, favorite con, series. What are you hoping for out of Transformers 1? And I will see you all next time. Yes, not long live the Kaiju King, long live the Bozo Robot Dinosaur King.